Numbers 16 to 19 today, which gets very exciting, especially compared to what we've been covering recently. And continuing the theme of grumblage, it's a few people in particular who get particularly grumbly, and the Bible describes them as getting insolent. 4 ringleaders in particular, weird names, I don't think that particularly matters, so I'm not going to try and pronounce them. But also it says that there's about 250 other Israelites who are with these 5 dissenters. And among those, some of these people are said to be quite senior in the Israelite community. It seems that what they're grumpy about is that Moses is being held in such high regard and almost like holding himself superior. They just sort of say they're grumpy, and then Moses goes back and sort of reflects what their problem is, which isn't then contested. And largely that's about them wanting to become priests. People are getting stroppy because they want to become priests. It's definitely a different time, isn't it? But there we go. Although it seems that most of them sound like they're Levites, but not all of them. So some of them, if they even try to become a priest, they're going to get killed. And they've been told what to do by the guy they would be a priest on behalf of, i.e. God. And so they're defying him and wanting to be... It doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? Moses turns to get angry now. He's very grumpy about these grumbling Israelites, and he goes to God and he says, "Do not accept their offering. I have not taken anything from them so much as a donkey." Which, to my mind, seems a little bit unnecessary, derogatory of donkeys, but there we go. But either way, we can summarise it as people very grumbly, Moses very angry, tells God, God not happy either. And he tells everybody, including Aaron and Moses actually, so 250 people plus Aaron plus Moses, come to the tabernacle the next day and bring an incense offering, and God will sort things out then. The next morning, the glory of God appears again. Again, no one bothers to describe what this looks like, but never mind. And it says to Moses and Aaron, "So you separate yourselves from these 250 people because I'm about to put an end to them." And it's interesting that God waited overnight. It's almost like he needed to simmer down and then failed to do it. And in the morning, he's like, "No, I'm still going to kill them. You guys move over there because they're about to get splattered." There's then a bit of a dispute in terms of Moses is trying to relay this to the Israelite dissenters. But at the same time, it sounds like he's trying to make his case for why he has been chosen by God. And as proof, Moses comes up with saying to these 250 grumblers, if they die of natural causes at the natural time to die, then it's proof that Moses wasn't selected by God, which is not a particularly useful proof, is it? Because it would be quite a long side away. But it then goes on to say that if something totally new befalls these Israelites and they meet their demise, like the ground opening up and swallowing them, then they will know that God has chosen Moses as to be their leader. And immediately, as soon as he's finished speaking, the ground opens up, swallows up the leader of the grumblers and his entire household. Not clear how many people that is, but presume that's wife and children and potentially cousins and all sorts. Ground swallows them up, seals back up again. The other 250 then go in a blind panic. The ground's going to eat us as well. But it turns out they were worrying about nothing because the glory of God is there. And then the fire tentacle comes out and flambés 250 people. It's an interesting choice of proofs, isn't it? Because it's presumably, it doesn't say whether this is witnessed by other people, but presumably it must have been. I guess at the same time, that's Moses' words, whereas God was clearly, I've told you about this, I've had enough, ground swallow you up, fire tentacle, do its thing. The next day is nuts, because the remaining people, the Israelites in general, start grumbling against Moses and Aaron for having killed a load of God's people. And so, did you not hear the story about how God's people were killed and how it wasn't Moses and Aaron's fault? And you're sort of left with, what on earth is with these people? It's just really, really odd. But God then turns up again and obviously is grumpy because they're grumbling, despite the fact they've just seen all this, well, it's just an endless list of stuff they've seen, and with very clear instructions about what they're supposed to be doing. It's not a big arse, really, is it? But God decides he again uses the term, he's going to put an end to them. Sounds like talking about the entire Israelite tribes. Aaron then rushes into the crowd with an incense offering to atone for the sin of the grumbling. Asks God not to put an end to them all. God agrees, but it seems in that few moments a plague had already started. The plague is then stopped by God as a result of Aaron's prayer and atonement ritual. But a few people had already died of that plague, so yeah, 14,700 people. There's then a kind of odd bit where God says to get a staff from each of the 12 leaders of the Israelite tribes. Aaron is to represent the Levite tribe. Get a staff, write the name of the leader on each one, and then put it in the tabernacle overnight. And then God says one of these will bloom, despite the fact they're a dead stick for a walking stick. And that will show to everybody who God has chosen to be the leader, basically. Despite the fact that we've been through all this, they've seen all these bajillions of miracles, and it's been pretty clear what's the deal is. But it seems like God's doing it again. Anyway, they put the 12 staffs in the tabernacle overnight. Next morning, Aaron's blossoms and blooms and starts growing almonds on it. Interesting. And God's feeling is that this will finally put an end to all the grumbling against him. I'm sceptical, because it doesn't seem to matter what he does, that there's grumbling, but we'll see in the next bit, hopefully, if anything comes of that. There's then a load of more ceremonial, boring stuff, a bit of stuff about clean and unclean. God seems to elevate the status of Levites a little bit at the expense of everybody else, but at the same time puts the responsibility on Aaron and his remaining sons for the behaviour of the other Levites. So it doesn't seem like a particularly good deal, given everybody's misbehaving. But that's basically what we've covered in 16 to 19. There's some stuff in that I found really interesting, and it are more people being killed by this fire tentacle and the ground swallowing up and all the rest of it. There's this interesting idea that I keep encountering with people where there's talk that the God of the New Testament is wonderful, charming, kind and forgiving and merciful and all wonderful. Did I say wonderful twice? Whatever. And the God of the Old Testament is just this deeply unpleasant, vengeful, horrible dictator sort of thing. And it's almost like they're two completely different people. My feeling is that I assume that's going to be based on a misunderstanding, but you can very much see where the Old Testament part is coming from, certainly. And in terms of the context, it does look like God is quite mean, but I'm not quite convinced it's that straightforward. And another book I'm reading at the minute is Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion, and he has quite a funny way of describing the God of the Old Testament, which I'm going to pinch. He says, the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty, ethnic cleanser, a misogynist, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, that's killing your children, pestilential, that's bringing pestilence and plagues, megalomaniacal, that's really hard to say, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. That's a hell of a sentence. I might do a separate video on what I think of that. I have got quite a lot of thoughts on it so far. But you can tell that's a guy who's actually read the Old Testament, or certainly read this bit of the Old Testament, and you can see where he's coming from. But at the same time, this is also a guy who's theoretically made very clear his existence, made very clear what he expects. The bar is not that high. You know, it's basically love your neighbour as yourself, and do my rituals and all the rest of it. And in return, you'll basically have a nice life. There's nothing redonkulous going on with any of this. But they keep not doing it, and it's just, if you put yourself in God's shoes for a second, which I appreciate is a ridiculous thing to try and do, but if you just, from that perspective, I've asked them to do this, I've told them to do that, I've showed them this, I've showed them that, I've asked them 30 times, they keep not doing it, what do you want me to do? And it's, yeah, I guess, I don't think that makes it okay to set fire to 250 people, by human standards, but I don't think it's quite as clear-cut as it might seem, and certainly not as clear-cut as Richard Dawkins sort of seems to be suggesting. But yeah, very interesting anyway. I enjoyed that section. Hopefully this is all now getting a bit more exciting, all the rest of it. But yeah, we'll move on and see if God's idea of getting a stick to grow almonds is going to solve all their problems.